Okay, in this video I'm going to be explaining how to make a basic little start menu. So we're going to be using a list to do this. So the first thing we're going to do is go into variables over here and we're going to make a list, and that's going to be for this sprite only. So we can just call that menu items. Now when the project starts, we want to empty out this list. So we'll delete all of menu items. Then we're going to add two things. We'll add start and options. And you can add more if you want. The way this is set up, you'll be able to add as many items as you want, more or less. But we'll just start with these two for the example. Okay, so now the next thing I'm going to do is make a broadcast. I'll call that open start menu. And we want to do that in a broadcast instead of just doing it off a start. That way, if we need to open the menu again without clicking the green flag, we can do that. So we're going to be using a clone for each one of our buttons. And to store data in those clones, we're going to make use of making variables for the sprite only. So I'll make a new variable for this sprite only and call it clone ID. And every time we make a new clone, they will store their own copy of that variable. They don't share those. So when I start this broadcast, we'll set that to 0. And now I'm going to repeat the length of our list. Let me go ahead and run that list just so we can see the items we have. Okay, now I'm going to repeat, and we'll go length of menu items. Okay, now the first thing I'm going to do is change clone ID by 1. So it starts at 0, and we'll change it by 1. So the first time we run through this loop, the clone ID will be 1. Create clone of myself. Okay. So now, when I start as clone, the first thing we're going to do is switch our costume. So you see in the menu we have item 1 is start, item 2 is options. So we'll go ahead and make costumes with those names, and then we'll switch costume to item clone ID of menu items. Okay. So when clone ID is 1, it'll switch the costume to the first item of this list, which is start. Okay. Now I'm going to put a forever loop in here. And the first thing I'm going to do is drag in this if-else block and put touching mouse pointer. Okay. So I'm going to put in here if touching mouse pointer, set brightness to 25, and if else, set brightness to 0. So if the mouse is touching it, it'll go bright. If it's not touching, it'll go to 0. So if I go ahead and start this, I haven't made my button costumes yet. And you'll notice when I drag my mouse over this sprite, it's not doing anything. And actually the problem is that the original sprite is on top of our clones that we just made. So what we need to do real quick is hide our sprite. And I'll go ahead and put that at the start here. And then when I start as clone, we can go ahead and show again. So now if I start, you can see when my mouse is over the sprite, it goes bright. Another thing you'll notice is that we have 2 clones right now, but you can only see 1. So if we go back over to this open start menu, I'm going to add this block, go to 0, 0, so that goes to the center of the screen. And then at the bottom of this repeat loop that we have, I'm going to change y by -50. So we start at 0, 0, we make 1 clone, change y by -50, and then we make another clone. So you can see now we have 2 little scratch cats. And they're overlapping, but once we make our buttons, this won't be a problem. So these buttons need to be clickable. So I'm going to go in here. So if touching mouse pointer, we'll add another if block, and that'll be if mouse down. So we can do a couple of things here. first thing I'm going to add is set brightness to 50. Okay, and so I'll show you what that does. So if we just hover over there, it'll go bright. If we go ahead and click it, it'll do a little flash. Okay. Now the next thing I'm going to do is do a broadcast. So you'll notice this is the same script no matter which clone we're looking at. So we're going to make use of the clone ID again to make sure our buttons can do different things. So I'll make a new broadcast and I'm going to call it Start Menu 1. And I'll make another broadcast and I'll call it Start Menu 2. Okay. Now, actually inside this button, I'm going to bring in a join block and I'm going to type in Start Menu and make sure I have a space at the end and then put in clone ID. Okay. So if the clone ID of our clone is 1, it'll broadcast Start Menu 1. If it's 2, it'll broadcast Start Menu 2. So in this case, Start Menu 1 really means just start, and Start Menu 2 means options. So you can use these broadcasts, elsewhere in your project. And if you forget, what these different broadcasts means, all you have to do is take a look at this list. So I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to broadcast clear clones. So I'll put that right there. And then when I receive clear clones, I'm going to delete this clone. Okay? So we did that in a broadcast instead of just putting delete this clone because all of our buttons need to go away, right? If I click the start button, that one should get deleted. The options button should also get deleted, right? So if we go in here, we can highlight our different buttons, and if we click one, they'll both go away. One thing we can do is before they get deleted, we can throw in a repeat block, and we'll go ahead and change ghost effect by 10 before we delete it. So now instead of just disappearing, it'll do something like this. They'll just fade away. One more thing, you'll notice when we start our project, you see the top button show up and then the bottom button show up. And we'd like it if those could just happen at the same time. So what we can do is we can take this open start menu code and we're going to make a custom block. And we'll just call it the same thing as the broadcast, open start menu. But then we're going to click this little box, run without screen refresh. So we'll put that code under that block and we'll just put the block under the broadcast. So when it broadcasts, it still runs the same exact code, but now it runs it without screen refresh. And you can see they both show up at the same time. So now our code is pretty much done. We'll go ahead and make our costumes. So to make a simple button, the first thing we're going to do is just put a little rectangle on our screen here. I'm going to go ahead and show the sprite just so I can see the size of what I'm working with. The next thing I'm going to do is round these edges. So you can see I grabbed this tool right here. So I can go in here and I can add points to this shape. So what I'm going to do is add 2 points sort of near the corner like this. And you can see that automatically they have these little, diamonds attached to them, right? And those diamonds, if you're not familiar, let you, curve these lines around. So what's going to happen is when I delete this pointed point at the corner, you'll get a rounded little edge like that. So I'm going to do that to all the corners. I'm just going to add 2 extra points sort of near them. Okay, and then when I go in and I delete, all these pointed corners will end up with a rounded button. You'll notice I didn't do a perfect job. Some of these corners are a little taller than others, but I can go ahead and edit these points. And a little trick is that, if you just try to move this by hand, you'd have to worry about it going side to side, right? But if you hold the shift key, you can see it kind of locks on there, right? So you can just move it up and down. So you can be just a little more precise. can be a little more precise when you're editing that. Okay, that looks good enough to me. Now, if you look at the sprite over here on the stage, you'll notice that on the end, a little bit of it gets clipped off there. So one way to fix that is to grab a shadow costume. So I just have one of these in my backpack, but I'll put a link to a project where you can get this costume. And you can see it's transparent on the outside. So I'm just going to sort of stretch this around so you can just see it just goes around the edge. And we no longer have that issue of it getting cut off. But I'll go ahead and put that behind the button. If you wanted to, you could have a little bit of that shadow peeking out, just to add some depth. But one thing to keep in mind is that we used if touching mouse in our code. So this is now part of the sprite, and if you have your mouse all the way down here, that button's still going to get highlighted, right? So we'll go ahead and lock that to the center. So we're almost there now. I'm going to just mess around with the outline of this a little bit. Maybe do that. And I'll put a little gradient on the inside. Nothing too crazy, and then we'll add a little bit of text on the inside so that we know what our button does. So this is the start button, and I'll go ahead and center that. And then that's it. So to make a new button, all I'm going to do is duplicate this costume. I'll make sure to rename it, right? And make sure when you're setting that name that it matches what you have in your list. And we'll go ahead and change that text, recenter it, and then that's it. So we'll go ahead and hide the sprite again, and we can give it a test. And would you look at that? Give it a nice little menu here. So I can hover over each of the buttons. You want to make sure there's no overlap sort of in the middle there. If there is, you can just go in and make it so the Y gets changed by a little more. And when we click on one of our buttons, see it flashes, and then they both fade away. So that's pretty good. That's pretty much it for this menu. You can use the same code to make a menu that pops up during the game. That's one of the advantages of using broadcasts like this. So I would encourage you to get creative with it and, experiment, see what you can come up with. And then that's it for this.